Okay, here we are again. Okay, overview XSLT, Xpath, and XSL FO. We're ready to start. Okay, so the first question we have here is, what is XSL? So that's just one quick slide that's going to get us oriented. And the answer is, not surprisingly, it's that it's going to be comprised of these three next sections: Xpath, XSL FO, and XSLT. So we're going to spend time looking at each of these separately in detail. And we'll be doing some examples also. And then finally, like we did yesterday, we'll move on to XSL resources, which are useful links for reference or research on this topic. Okay, I skipped the Who Am I slide since almost everyone was here yesterday, so we'll move forward. What is XSL? So XSL stands for Extensible Style Sheet Language. I guess they didn't want to call it ESL, so they took the X there. According to Wikipedia, it's a family of transformation languages which allows one to describe how files encoded in the XML standard are to be formatted or transformed. In other words, it's a bunch of code languages, computer languages, that lets you, again, format or transform, basically manipulate in different ways and output in different ways an XML file that was served as the input data. Okay, most of the XSL family is written in valid XML, which stands for Extensible Markup Language. And just to make sure we're all clear, XML is the language that requires matching starting and ending tags around the content, like the sample here. XSL includes Xpath, which stands for XML Path Language, and that's the only one of the three that's not written in valid XML. XSL FO, which stands for XSL Formatting Objects, and XSLT, which stands for XSL Transformations. And instead of giving you the short summary here, we're going to go through each of these separately. That's the main topic of our discussion tonight. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about XML and look at a file. Right? We're all familiar with the concept of XML, that you have basically tagging around content, which identifies the nature of the content. We are all familiar with examples of XML, such as HTML, which is a subset of XML, which allows us to say things are paragraphs, things are body, lists, different ways of formatting. And we're obviously all familiar with DITA, which is semantic tagging, which is identifying types of content. This is a task, this is a reference, this is a concept. But I just wanted to open up an XML file, despite all of our familiarity, just to make sure we're familiar with it in the way we're going to be using it today. What do I mean? So I made a little XML file, not DITA, just for this webinar, just to try to illustrate some concepts, and we're going to be referring to it as we move forward. So I stuck it in here for reference. I called it webinars.xml. Okay, by the way, I'm displaying it in Microsoft Visual Web Developer. I mentioned yesterday it's a free downloadable tool from Microsoft, which allows you, the color codes XML and DITA, and allows you to format things nicely. It's a really useful tool. It doesn't have to be this one, but I strongly recommend using some sort of XML formatting tool. Just makes your life much, much easier instead of sitting there in TextPad or Notepad and trying to indent and make line breaks and what have you. Okay, so here I made a very simple, again, XML file, not DITA. It has the first line that all XML files have, which says that it's an XML file. And then it has a few different nodes. There's a training node, and then there's a sub-node called webinar. Right? And then within each webinar, we have a name, a date, and a level. The levels I just did pretty randomly. Don't take them too seriously here. Okay? And like I said, in an editor, so you can collapse easily, and you can see I put in the first 4 webinars of our training series with each of its details. Okay, so there are relationships. Each of these tags is called an element. And again, I realize for some people this is very elementary, but I want to make sure we have our concepts clear before we move forward into the really complicated stuff. Now, these elements have relationships to each other. So in this case, training is the root element, or the ancestor, the first element, and under it, it has a child. The child is the webinar element. Okay, so in XML terminology, we're talking training is a parent element of the child element webinar, or the webinar is a child element of training. Okay, then we have name, which is a child element of webinar. And then we have siblings. We have date is a sibling to name, since it's on the same level of indentation, as is level a sibling to both name and date. And then obviously anytime you open an element tag, you have to close it. So you close level after level. Webinar closes webinar, and training closes training. Okay, just to make sure we're all familiar with the terminology of an XML file, because it's going to get much more complicated from here. Okay, so here I have content, and then within each element tag, I put in content. Just to complete our terminology overview, you can have attributes within an element. So let's say here, for example, let's say I write date format equals, I don't know, full date. Okay, so in that case, the word format is an attribute of the element date, and the value of my attribute can give me more information. So I know that I have a full date here. I wrote June 22nd, 2010 instead of maybe, 06/22/210 or what have you. But that's, again, referred to as an attribute. So just to summarize our little intro to XML here, we have elements which have different levels of indentation in the document. We have a root element, we have child elements, we have sibling elements. Okay, and it's basically viewed and we have attributes inside of elements. It's basically viewed in a tree format, and that's how we can traverse the tree or reference different elements, or nodes is another term, to get information we want from a given XML file. This is obviously very practical for DITA as well. Display not updating, can't see open file. Is anyone else having trouble seeing the open file here? Can you see it now, Henry? I was pointing, so I hope everyone didn't miss it. Are we good to go? Okay, I'm going to assume that it's since updated. If it hasn't, please chat, and I will, I don't know what, try to resolve that. Okay, so back to our scheduled program here. Okay, so that's XML. And now we're going to jump into XSL, which we just said is a language which manipulates given XML data files. You can't see it all, or you can't see the... Okay, I'm getting messages here that he can't see anything. Is anyone else having trouble seeing? Do you want to try relogging in, Henry? Here, someone else said he could see fine. A couple other people said they could see. So maybe, Henry, you want to try logging out and logging in, see if that helps? I could start and stop the screen viewing, but I don't know if that'll help you since other people can see. So maybe try that and you'll see it. Oh, got it. Excellent. Okay. Technology is wonderful, isn't it, everybody? Okay. Moving on. Okay, so that was our what is XSL. Now let's get down to the gory technical details here. Okay, just to warn you, Xpath is gory and technical, but it's the hardest thing here. So once we get past Xpath, we'll be smooth sailing hopefully from now on. Okay, so we said Xpath is a language used to select information from an XML document. Okay, right? I might have my webinar document or my DITA document, but if I can't get to the information that's there, it doesn't help me so much. So Xpath is what does the search and recovery, right? It does the formatting and the logic, and not only the logic, mostly it will go and get things for you, and it will also, you'll see, you can also tell it conditions, like get me something in the case that, the date is after today's date or what have you. Okay. And now XPath is based on relationships between nodes, which include elements and attributes. So that we just talked about in our XML primer. And now we all know what this means, that it relates to parents, children, siblings, ancestors, and descendants. Okay? So as we discussed, XPath is used to traverse that tree, that XML tree, to retrieve information for us from a given XML file. Now, XPath can also contain expressions which calculate and compare values using operators. Okay? So you can say, for example, get me all the webinars, like I just said, whose date is after today's date. Get me all the webinars whose level equals introductory. Okay, so we can evaluate conditions of the type of information we want to retrieve from our XML document. Likewise, we have a nice little library here that we can use built-in functions. So I could say, count the number of webinar nodes there are, so I'll know how many webinars there are in total. And count is a built-in XPath function, which would return, in our case, 4, because I had 4 webinars in my document. Nodes can be referenced using full syntax or abbreviated syntax, which we're going to show you very shortly in the next slide. Right, exactly. I didn't have presenter in there, so I wrote and get me all the webinars being taught by me. Exactly, that's the point. Okay, so that could be in the next version of this sample data. Okay, so as long as we have the concept clear, this is the main thing that's important to remember about XPath, which is that's what goes ahead and searches, retrieves information for us using expressions, right? Comparisons, greater than, less than, equals, etc. And functions such as count, for example. Again, all different ways of retrieving information that we want to know. Like asking we ask the XPath a complicated question using XPath language, and it goes ahead and answers the question for us using the information in the XML file. Okay, that's the main thing I want everyone to walk away with about XPath. Now we're going to get into the gory technical details, as I promised, and it might be a little confusing, but as long as we have the basic concept down, that's the most important thing here. Okay, I don't know if I missed a chat just now. I saw the window, but I don't see a new chat, so I'm going to assume I didn't miss it. Okay, moving forward to our gory technical details. Okay, so first of all, we said there's a full syntax and an abbreviated syntax. So the full syntax is actually easier to understand because we spell everything out. That's why it's full. So a new term we have is an axis. An axis defines a node set relative to a current node. So we said node is a way of saying element or attribute. A node set is a group of nodes. Okay, so these are the legal XPath axes, and they're pretty much self-explanatory, especially now that we did that little exercise with the sample data. Self refers to a node you're in, child, following a node after you, preceding before, ancestor, descendant is an extension of parent and child, an attribute node, following sibling, preceding sibling, etc. Okay, so in our example, for example, we have here, again, training is a parent, webinar is a child, name is a descendant of training, date is a following sibling of name, name is a preceding sibling of date, training is an ancestor of name. We get the idea. Okay, so that's how the XPath asks these questions for us from the XML data. Okay, now just to make things fun, we have this abbreviated syntax, which you have to really be comfortable with in order to be able to read properly. Or you have to have, okay, so you have questions here about a node being an attribute. You thought nodes were only elements. I believe it can also be an attribute, but I can verify that. But yeah, I think usually people refer to them as elements. That's true. Yeah, see, I wrote even here, between nodes, which include elements and attributes. I think technically it can be both. Okay, so here's the chart. And again, this is the reference, so I'll have the slides available later so you can look up things when you start looking into your code. But just to show you, so we have a single dash is the root node, so that's saying, or the current node. So let's say if I were looking at my webinar document, that would be the training node. So get me everything from there if I'm coming from the outside. Or get two slashes. Get me any descendant of the current node. Dots, current node, parents, attributes. Some of these are familiar from regular expressions if you have a technical background. But it's basically shorthand for defining the name, the full syntax that we saw in the previous slide. Can I see I see a comment, and I don't know why I'm not seeing the chat. But feel free to write it again if for some reason I'm not responding to someone. Okay. Okay, so let's look at some examples. We've been talking very theoretically. Let's get down to practical applications here. So Xpath, we said that Xpath is used by XSLT, which we haven't yet discussed, to retrieve information from an XML document. For example, a variable value, a test condition, or matching a template. So let's look at the example. So these are actual examples from the DITA Open Toolkit, primarily from the PDF2 plugin. The line numbers, I believe, are from version 1.4.3. So if they don't exactly match up in the latest version, it could be it's just because you're a few lines off. Okay, so here, for example, we have Xpath that's trying to, again, get us information. Get me a node that, I'll use my little pointer here. Okay. So sometimes it's helpful to start from the beginning, right? So let's start from here. The star means get any node, if you remember from the previous chart. And here it says contains class topic topic. So get me any node whose class attribute contains the text topic topic. So basically saying in English, get me a topic, right? Because even, we'll talk about extensively when we talk about PDF2 customization, but even if you're a task or a concept or a reference, since you're specialized from a base topic class, they'll still say topic topic in there somewhere. So get me any kind of topic. But I don't just want any kind of topic. I'm looking at a particular axis. The axis I'm looking at is ancestor. So you want a node from a node that's the current node's ancestor. Okay, so look at all my ancestors. All the ancestors of my node whose class attribute contains the text topic topic, and return, but now I'm nodding it. I feel like I'm not talking clearly here. Okay, the expression will be true if the condition inside the parentheses is false. Meaning, let me know, tell me the answer. Is it true that none of my ancestors are topics? Basically, that's the question we're asking the Xpath. And it will return true if no ancestors of the current node are topics, which may mean, for example, we're in the map because nothing above it is a topic. And it will return false if there is an ancestor that's a topic, which might mean that, you know, I'm in a step or I'm in a body or what have you, a P, because that means I'm inside of a topic somewhere in there. It doesn't have to be directly inside of a topic because we didn't ask for a parent, we asked for an ancestor. But if I'm somewhere in a topic on some level, then I'll get a true back from this expression. Okay, we have some more examples. Here's an example from a code. This is good because it's easier to concretize. From code that checks if an item is last in a list. Right? Sometimes you want to say if an item's last in the list, you know, don't leave it hanging in the beginning of the page, or do some other special formatting with it. So how do you know if the item's last in a list? Okay, so here we're using a function that I mentioned before called count. We're saying, let me know how many following siblings there are. Okay, we said following sibling is a node that is a sibling to the current node and comes after it, right? Like we had in our example, we had the name of the webinar, and the following siblings were the date and the level. So saying, count how many nodes come after my node. If it's 0, then return true. What does that mean? If there are no nodes after my node, that means I'm last, right? If I'm last, then I can tell it to do formatting that applies to items that are last in the list. But if there is even one node that comes after me, that's a following sibling to me, the one I'm in now, then return false because that means I'm not last and I can ignore my special formatting rules. Okay, so in both of these examples, we're not actually returning the value of anything. We're evaluating a condition. We're returning a true or false as the answer to a question. So we're asking very complicated questions of the XML using this XPath syntax. In the previous example, remember, it was let me know if I'm inside of a topic or not. And in this example, it's let me know if I'm last. In this particular case, it was last in a list, but it could be last in anything. And then, we have to know how to ask the question, but once you ask the question, the answer is straightforward. It's either true or false. And then once you have the answer, you can do whatever you need to do. Okay. A third example here is from Commons XSL also. And here we're not just asking for a true or false answer, we're actually asking for information back. We don't just want to know, am I inside of a topic or am I last on the list? We want an ID value, right? That's this end part here. If you remember in the abbreviated syntax, the @ sign is short for an attribute. So it's asking to get the value of the ID attribute. So which ID attribute? Okay, so we want to say from a node that's the current node or the current node's ancestor, that's ancestor or self axes. So either, let's say I'm in, let me go back there. Let's say I'm in, I don't know, the name of the second webinar. So it could be name, it could be webinar, it could be training, right? Myself, ancestor or self, myself or an ancestor of mine. So from any node in that axis, get any node that's the star, whose class attribute contains the text topic. Here's another function that's used all over the place in the DITA Open Toolkit, which is the contains function, right? We could have said whose class attribute equals topic, like we said before. Did we have it before? Yeah, no, we didn't have it before. But it's best practice to use contains because there might be other things in that string. It might also say topic task, for example. Side note, we'll get back to that in later webinars. But anyway, so from the ancestor or self axes, get me a node, which is a topic essentially. Don't get me all the nodes that are a topic because there might be lots of ancestors that are topics. I only want the first one. Okay, so you have a predicate that's saying get me the first one. And I want to know what the ID of that node is. Okay, so in English, we're saying from the node that I'm in, check through all the nodes that are myself or an ancestor that are topics, and get me the ID of the first one. Okay, and so in this case, the XPath is going to actually retrieve a piece of information, not just a true or false answer. Again, if you got lost by any of this technical mumbo jumbo, don't worry about it. This is supposed to be beginners, and I don't want to get confused on the details. But what I was trying to show you, again, is that basic point that XPath is used to ask complicated questions of the XML. It goes through the XML, it returns information to us, it returns answers about the nature of the XML to us. And it does this using, obviously, technical methodology. Again, we have axes, which define a relationship, a set of nodes that are in a certain relationship to the one you're looking at. So we'd like as parent, sibling, child, etc. We have expressions, equals, greater than, less than, that evaluate to something. And we have functions that also help us ask questions like count or contains. And by putting and we have different syntaxes. We have an abbreviated syntax and a full syntax, both of which essentially do the same thing, but the abbreviated one looks cooler if you're trying to be very technical, because it's harder for the outsider to read. The other one's much clearer. It's also more typing. But the point is that by putting all of these different tools together, that's what enables the XPath to go ahead and get us the exact information we need, and then we can go ahead and manipulate that data in the rest of our XSL code. So that's the short overview of XPath. I'm going to pause now for any questions or comments. I hope I wasn't going too quickly or too slowly. As I said, it's hard to know, especially since I can't see anybody. So please feel free to speak up with any questions you might have. Okay. If there are no questions, I'm hoping that means that everyone understood perfectly and I'm going exactly at the right speed for everyone. If not, please correct me. And we're going to move forward. And Ed, Do you want me to unmute you? How do I unmute you? Trying. For some reason, it's not letting me unmute. Can you talk? Or type? Do you want to try typing, Ed? I don't think you're muted. Okay, if you want to speak, please speak up or send a chat or a question. I'll see it. Otherwise, I'm going to move forward. Maybe it was a... Okay. Feel free to jump in as we go. Okay, so that concludes our discussion of XPath. Like I said, that should have been the most complicated part, so from here on it should be smooth sailing. Now we're going to jump right into XSL FO. What's XSL FO? XSL FO is a unified presentation language which stores both the content of the document and the document's formatting information. What does that mean? That means that whereas XML and DITA is used for content, and let's say HTML is mostly used for formatting, this tagging, XSL FO, well, I'm sorry, that's not true. HTML mixes both content and styling. Likewise, that's my next bullet, I should have looked at it, FO also mixes up the content with the presentation style that's desired. I'm sorry, can you use Xpath to address an entity declaration in the XML? I'm not sure I know what you mean by that. What do you mean by entity declaration in the XML? Like a metadata entity type thing? You want to clarify? Character entity. I think Xpath can be used for all entities in the XML, but I do not know specifically about that one, so I can look it up and get back to you. Okay. I'll make a note of that. Okay. So as we were saying, the XSL FO, as opposed to DITA, which is mostly used for the content and not for the presentation, already combines the content with the desired formatting. Okay? It's intended for documents with pages as opposed to other languages such as HTML. And the reason we care about it is because it's generally used as a stage before the PDF formatting. So, in fact, in the DITA Open Toolkit, we start off with DITA. Then the toolkit translates the DITA into XSL FO, which contains almost all the information we need to make a PDF. And then it goes through a PDF rendering engine to actually create the PDF from the XSL FO. This document is converted to PDF using a formatting object processor. The most popular ones are FOP, RenderX, or Antenna House. The FO plugin uses a .fo extension for XSL FO files. So in a nutshell, what XSL FO does for us is it's an intermediate step between the DITA and the PDF. It contains all of the content that a DITA contains and almost all of the formatting we need for the PDF. Not quite all, because it doesn't, some things like page numbers and such aren't there yet. But it's the stage before we actually get to the full PDF output. Now there are a number of required, so what does this look like? So there are 4 required components of an FO document. There's an XML declaration, a root node, which we talked about if you remember in the webinar's example, and we're going to come back to it. This is a different kind of root node for FO. a page layout section, and a document data section. And we're going to talk about each of these sections separately. Okay, so XML declaration is pretty straightforward. It's basically saying XSL FO is a type of XML, so it gives that regular tag. If you remember, we saw it at the beginning of my document as well. This XML version number encoding. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Okay, now we have the root node, and the root node encompasses, it contains the whole document, including these other two sections we mentioned, which are the page layout section and the document data sections. And the actual content it contains is that it declares the XML FO namespace. We're not going to go, that's not the topic of this webinar. We may get back to it in other webinars. But that's what XML-NS stands for, is XML namespace. And it's identifying FO as the namespace. Okay, so we see here there's FO:root. It's the root element of the FO document. And then within this FO root element, we have the remaining two sections. Section number 1 is page layout. Section number 2 is document data. Okay. So now we get to the more practical or interesting parts. What does page layout do for us? What page layout does for us, it defines the properties of a page, including the size, margins, and direction of the text flow. Okay, and there can be, and what it's called in technical language is simple page masters. And there can be many simple page masters, one for each type of page. So to translate it into, I guess, a more of a real world example is the page layout is defining what size your paper is, like as if you were putting something into the printer. You know, what's the area that the text can cover? What's the width of all the margins? What's the height and the width of the page? As you can see here, all these elements, margin bottom, top, left, right, the name of the master. So we might have, let's say, a page for a quick reference that's one size, and a page for a manual it's another size. Those would be different page masters in XSL FO. And we also have here a writing mode. If you see at the bottom here, use the highlighter tool. So it's saying also what's the basic mode for text in this document. In this case, it's LRTB, which stands for left, right, top, bottom, which is, most English character texts are like that. But you can have a document that goes obviously from right to left if you're writing in Arabic or Hebrew. I believe also bottom to top. I'm not sure exactly when you would use that, but it's theoretically possible. Okay, so we have the page layout here, which basically includes a simple page master, which defines the area of our page, the area of the margins of the page, and what the basic writing mode is inside of our page. Okay, the next section is the document data section. So the first thing the document data section does is it references a master reference, that's what we just talked about, which was defined in the page layout section. So if you see down here, it says master reference equals my page master. That was the name of the previous chunk, which we said is 8.5 by 11, left, right, top, bottom, margins, etc. Okay. It also uses flow to define which part of the page should be used. We're going to have a little diagram in the next section. Basically, XSL region body is the middle part of the page where you'd expect the text to be. You can also put text in other pages, other sections of the document. And then finally, it contains the content of the page, which is formatted using blocks and inline objects. Okay, so here we have a block container with a block, which is contains the content of my page. So I'm going to show you one more diagram, and then I'm going to show you a practical example here. Here's the page layout diagram for left, right, and top to bottom text flow, which was defined by the writing mode attribute that we saw previously. Okay, so we see here that in the middle is the region body, which is, as I said, where you'd expect to see text in the middle. But you can also define some text should appear in the top margin, right margin, bottom margin, left margin, and before or after the region body, and on top or on the bottom. I'm sorry, start and end, before, after. And this diagram is different for different text flows. So let's say you're going from right to left, for example. You'd have region start on the right over here, and region end on the left over here. So just in case you thought it was obvious, it does vary based on the writing mode. But this is our standard XSL FO page layout for an English document. Okay, so before I get to this, Okay, we'll do this and we'll do the example at the end. Okay, so now obviously we don't just want text in our document, we want it to look a certain way, be formatted nicely. So the way we accomplish this is that XSL FO has many elements which are used to format the document. All elements are preceded by the FO prefix. And these elements include, I just put a long list here, there are more, but different table elements to define how the table should look, different list elements to define the group of lists and each item, block elements we explained, and inline elements. Inline obviously is within the same line. You can change formatting. A page number element, a leader element. Leader, let's say you would use, for example, in the TOC, you want to have dots between the name of the chapter and the page number. So you might use a leader to repeat the dot again and again. Okay, and obviously you can use a reference for formatting objects. One useful reference, I put it here and in a number of the resource links, is W3 Schools has a number of tutorials for XSLT, XSL FO, and Xpath. So if you want to review this, that would be a good place to go for a beginning, an introductory lesson in these technologies. And I referenced a page here which has their XSL FO reference there. Okay, and then besides the elements, each element in XSL FO has a corresponding set of attributes. So for example, widow and orphan control, you can say, like we said at the list, right? If it's the last item, make sure it stays with the rest of the list. That's called keep with previous. Colors, background color of the page or of the block, and color of the text. Different font size and style attributes, border attributes, spacing, all the things we need to make our documents look the way we want it to. Let's look at an example, because this has been a lot of abstract discussion. So I made a document here called Simple FO, because I tried to keep it as simple as possible with the minimal requirements for about XSL FO document. So you'll see here, I hope everyone can see my page. We have the XML. Remember, there were 4 required elements. Okay, so let's find them. We have the XML Declaration. That was number 1. That was easy. We have the FO root, beginning, end. That was requirement number 2. Good. Now we said there's a page layout section and a data section. So here's our page layout section. FO layout master to set. And it defines my page with the height, a width, and different margins in the region body. Okay, then we have our data section, which is the second one here, which has our content. So we're saying that we want it to be in a block, color equals purple, welcome to the June webinars, with another message here, enjoy your second session of DITA OT training. So how does this look? So luckily, there are different tools that let you view it in a graphical format. One of these tools is XSL Formatter by Antenna House. They're GUI, which lets you really see how it's going to look in the output. And we're going to get back to this a lot when we do PDF customization, but a good tip is to, if you're trying to make a document work a certain way, you want to first look at it, first work on the FO to make sure the FO looks right, and then go back to the XSL to make it generate the FO you want. Because when you try to do things from the XSL every time, you can get lost in the complexity of it. Okay, so here we have a picture. Welcome to the June webinars. Enjoy your second session of DITA OT training. This is how it would look when for the output. Okay, and just to show you, I can make simple changes to make this look different. I could say, okay, now I want it to be, let's say, a square. So I'll make my height and my width both 10 centimeters. I want it to be not purple. I want it to be red. Background color is green. And I can add the word today, for example. Just random changes here. Then I can go ahead and refresh, and we changed the page layout, so the page is smaller. We changed the coloring, we added a word, and you see that automatically being reflected in the output. You see we have a question here. Whoa. Your example included the content in the FO file. Typically, you might have a DITA map that references hundreds of topics. I assume the FO document can reference the DITA map and have some instructions saying get the topics from there. So usually the FO document isn't referencing the DITA map. It's created by a program that's reading the DITA map, by code that's reading the DITA map. So in the case of the DITA OT, for example, you have the DITA map. You actually have an earlier stage in the processing called topic merge, where it takes all the different files, the hundreds of files that it's referencing, and pulls it into one big DITA file called the merged file. Then you have the XSL, which works on that huge file and generates a file called topic.fo, among others, which contains all the content in that huge DITA merged file, as well as the formatting instructions it received from the style sheets. So the answer is that once you get to topic FO, to this big FO file, you're already most of the way there. It already has referenced all of the DITA files that were included in your DITA map. This is what the toolkit's doing for us. This is exactly why we need the toolkit, because the toolkit's doing all that processing, dumping it into a big FO file, at which point our rendering engine, again, FOP RenderX or Antenna House, can take this one huge file and spit it out as a PDF. Does that answer your question? Great. Any other questions or comments? We've concluded the XSL FO section, and we are pretty much on target for the last one. Okay. If there are no further questions or comments, we will proceed. And as always, feel free to jump in if necessary. Okay, so we talked about Xpath, right? That's our retrieve. That's the language that we use to ask questions of the XML file and to retrieve data. We talked about XSL FO, which is the presentation level, where it's already encompassing all the data and formatting it as per its instructions. Now, what ties this all together is XSLT. XSLT stands for Extensible Style Sheet Language Transformations. It's used to transform XML documents, such as DITA, into XML, other types of XML, such as XHTML or XSL FO, or other documents such as text. So we have this little useful diagram here, I think, where you see we're taking two pieces of input. On the one hand, we have the source XML document down here, which is basically our DITA file for practical purposes, but it could be anything. It could be my webinars file. We have the XSLT style sheet, which could be, doesn't matter if it's out of the box or customized, but some set of instructions that says how to format the file. Both of those things get plugged into our XSLT engine, which could be a piece of software or a browser. And out comes a new document, which could be HTML, XSL FO, or something else. Okay, that's what XSLT is doing for us, with the help of this engine. What do I mean? We're gonna explain. Okay, so XSLT style sheets contain the formatting and logic of the document. These style sheets are not document specific. They can be reused with any content, as opposed to the original XML document, which actually contains the content, right? Obviously, you need different DITA for each document you have, but you use hopefully the same set of style sheets to format any document, all documents, into the desired output format. And as we saw in the picture, style sheets can be applied to the content via any XSLT compliant browser, such as IE6+, or software such as Cooktop. We're going to come back to Cooktop in a second. XSL files end with some sort of XSL extension. And the reason we're focusing on this is that much of the internal workings of the toolkit and the plugin, as well as the toolkit and plugin customizations, are implemented using XSLT. So this is a core technology that's used in both the toolkit and toolkit plugins to make things happen, which is why it's important to master, at least on a basic level. So I wanted to show you an example with my webinar content to make this a little more visual. Okay, so we have our webinars file, which has my content that we looked at originally. Now I made another file, which is an XSL file, right? Webinars is an XML file, and this is XSL. It's very simple, again, just to illustrate the concept. And if you find here, as opposed to our more complicated Xpath examples we saw before, there's a very simple Xpath here. It says select a node that's, if you're looking from the outside of the document, right? It's inside of training, and it's inside of webinar, and it's an element called level. So you select the node whose level element has the value of all. Okay, so if you look at my, and then format it and spit it out in a chart, in an HTML chart. So if you look at my example, let's do that together manually, okay? You have training, that's the grandparent. You have webinar, that's the child or the parent. And then you have level, that's a child. So we're saying look at all the levels, pick the ones that are all, so that would be numbers 3 and 4, and give me the information for those webinars and spit it out. So the reason I like Cooktop, besides the fact that it's free, is because it's very, you'll see what I mean, it's a very visual way of doing this. Okay, so I can open up these documents. So I'm opening up my XML document, and I'm opening up my XSL document. Okay, so we have source XML is my webinars file. Style sheet XSL is my XSL file. Now I do run, and I get my results. Lo and behold, I have these 2 webinars with a level of all. Again, I did some, colors or whatever, but that's not our main focus tonight. Okay, now I can easily, let's say I take out this qualification. Well, let's say before I do that, I can say, don't get me all, get me introductory. Assuming I know how to spell that, that should work also. Okay, so I changed all to introductory. I saved it. I did F5. Now I have the first 2 webinars. Okay, I can take out this clause altogether. I can take out the predicate. Just say, get me all the webinars. And now I have all 4 here. Okay, so hopefully what this is illustrating is A, the role of XSL, that it's allowing us to powerfully pull together our formatting and our content and spit it out in output. That was that diagram we saw before. And B, a somewhat simplified example of how powerful Xpath can be, right? With a few words here, I was able to sort my content by level. Obviously, you can do much more complicated things as well, but again, this is supposed to be a simple demonstration. Then in each one, here's another XSL part. I say, well, get me the value of each node. So I'm saying in each table, I'll get me the value of the name of that webinar and the value of the date of that webinar and the value of the level. That's what we're seeing in each of our table cells. Okay, so that's a quick XSL demonstration here. Okay. So now I want to go in our remaining 5 minutes or so. I wanted to go into a little more depth about XSLT. XSL, we might go a drop over, but we'll see. Okay, XSLT elements, the main units of code that the FO plugin uses to process DITA are attribute sets and templates. Okay, an attribute set is a unit of code that primarily stores information about how to format a DITA element. For example, an attribute set which relates to a P element may store information about which font size, and font weight should be used to display text surrounded by P size tags. Okay, so it's basically formatting information stored in something called an attribute set. A template is a unit of code that primarily contains instructions about how to process the DITA. So as opposed to how to format the DITA, here we're talking about processing the DITA. Okay, for example, before we said it, an attribute set tells us how the P tag should look. Here it's saying, and a template relates to a P tag may contain instructions about when and where to display auto-generated text and what the text should be. Okay, attribute set, template. Both used by XSLT. Okay, now within an attribute set, we have attributes. This is where we're going to start to get confusing. Okay, an attribute is an XSLT element that corresponds to a single XSL FO attribute. So before we get into my complicated definition here, we can look at the example. Okay, so we're saying there's an XSL element called XSL attribute, and the name of the attribute is border left width. It could have been color, it could have been font size, doesn't matter, and it has a value. Okay, and an attribute set contains the group of those attributes. So I could say for a phrase tag, I'm defining the borders. I could have been defining the font size, the font color, what have you. So basically an attribute set is a group of attributes. I know I'm skipping this definition, but I'm going to try to show it to you instead of reading it to you, because the reading gets a little complicated. After I show it to you, it might be easier to understand what the text says. Okay. Now the template, as we said, contains instructions about how to process the XML content defined by the template's match attribute. Okay. So for example, this is a real example from the FO plugin. We're saying basically here's a fancy Xpath, which is saying get me a phrase. For any phrase, we have this XSL attribute saying use attribute sets PH. Okay, so apply the formatting that was defined in the attribute set called PH. Okay, so that's what I wrote here. This template matches XML elements whose class attribute contains a text of topic PH, and it puts the content of those elements inside of the XSL FO inline tag. That's this. And then it pulls the attributes from that PH attribute set. So if you remember in the previous slide, it was pretty boring. It just talked about border left width and border right width being 0. So here it's saying so in the template it's saying for any phrase element, make the border left width and border right width 0 as defined in the PH attribute set. Okay, so to pull this together, this is again a real life example, which is why it's so boring, sorry. Let's say we have a DITA file where the original XML content has a phrase in it. Oops. And the content of the phrase is this data, Microsoft Internet Explorer 6. Okay? And you can see here that the class, again, is topic PH because it's a phrase. So when it's processed using the template and the attribute set from the previous slides, this is what happens. We get an FO inline element, as we saw here. Remember in that template it was saying give me an FO inline. We get border left width equals 0 and border right width equals 0 as defined in the PH attribute set. Border left width equals 0 and border right width equals 0. The ID here we didn't talk about, but it's coming directly from the XML content. And here we have the actual data inside, which is this text. I know this can be confusing to people. I hope it wasn't too fast. Now I'm going to go back to my definition because it might be a little clearer. Okay, so the name of the XSLT attribute corresponds to the XSL FO attribute name. And the text surrounded by the XSLT attribute tags corresponds to the XSL FO attribute value. So in our example, in XSL FO, we have this. We have XSL attribute, name equals border left width, and the value of the element is 0 point. When that gets translated into XSL FO, it doesn't look like this. Remember this? Okay, name is border left width, value is 0 point. It actually says border left width equals 0 point. That's all I was trying to say. Is that you have this syntax within XSL, again, XSL attribute, which the name of the attribute is going to be the actual attribute name later, and the value of the attribute is going to be the value of the attribute later. And once it's run through the processing, in your output, you just got FO inline, border left width equals 0 point. Hopefully that was clear. Please feel free to jump in if there are any comments or questions. And the slides will be available for viewing on SlideShare, I believe, within 48 hours. Just to summarize the XSLT section, we said that XSLT is the language that's utilizing Xpath to perform logic and formatting on the XML content. So remember we had that picture again, right? We said we're inputting an XSLT style sheet on the one hand and a source XML document on the other hand. We're plopping it into some sort of XSLT engine. In the example I showed you, it was Cooktop. In real life in the DITA OT, it's usually Saxon, as we discussed yesterday, or Zalen, second choice. And out comes our beautifully formatted new document. It might be my purple webinar FO, XSL FO file. It might be my orange webinar HTML file, or it might be a beautifully formatted PDF for, for our clients or our internal usage. But that's all done by combining these technologies, especially XSLT and Xpath. XSL FO is used primarily for PDF. So if you're making HTML, that would not come into play. So that concludes our discussion of XSLT. I'll pause for questions or comments, and if there are none, we'll wrap up with resources. Okay, to generate XSL FO, wait, hold on. So XSLT is used against the DITA doc to generate XSL FO, oh, look at that, which is used to generate the PDF, exactly. And again, we'll go into much more detail about this when we talk about upcoming sessions about generating PDFs specifically, but that's exactly right. You start with DITA, you apply the XSLT engine applies the XSLT and the style sheets and the XPath inside of them to produce the second stage, which is XSL FO. And then the rendering engine, Antenna House, RenderX or FOP, takes the XSL FO and turns it into a PDF. That's exactly right. And that's actually an oversimplification. There are actually 7 steps in the process, but that's the main broad picture of it. So yes, no problem. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we're just going to move on to the, next question. Where is the FO file located in the Open Toolkit? Also, excellent question. Will also be discussed at length next time, I believe. But the short answer is that there's that topic FO file that I mentioned should be in your output directory. The reason it might not be in your output directory is because in the build XML file of the plugin, not the general one of the DITA OT, but in the demo FO directory, there's a little delete section which cleans up the temporary files. So what you need to do is take out that delete section, and you should see topic FO in your output directory and intermediate files for processing in your temp directory. Okay, any other questions or comments? Keep them coming. It's good that people are interested in listening. When do you need to use Xpath? I see I missed that question. Oh, I don't know why. I missed a bunch of questions. Henry asked about when do you need to use Xpath. I hope we answered that in the course of this discussion. If you still have a question, please write in more. Okay, anything else? Okay, you'll have a few more minutes to think about it while we look at the resources briefly. And obviously you can always email also afterwards. Okay, so quickly, resources. I listed a couple of email lists here. We're all familiar with DITA users. There's also a XSL email list from Mulberry Technologies. W3C documentation. This is the official documentation of XSL. And as you can see, there are different sets of documents for XSL, which XSL includes XSLT and XSL FO. Xpath has its own set of documentation. You can see it's separated by version. Just a quick word of warning, these are written in a very technical and very detailed way. So they're excellent references, but they're very heavy reading, let's just say. So if you like reading textbooks or you're comfortable reading textbooks, this is definitely a place to go. If that thing is overly technical for you, you might want to wait till you become a little more familiar before diving into this documentation, but you can definitely take a look. I see there's a chat, just a second. And then other websites, if you want like a lighter introduction to XSL, as I mentioned before, I'd recommend W3 Schools. You might want to start with W3 Schools and then go to the W3C documentation. And here are a couple other XSLT references I saw, and I put in Wikipedia just because I find it really useful to define terms, especially when you're reading about new technologies. Here's another question. Sure. Someone had an off-topic question and wanted to know what my email address is. So first of all, you can always email Noah or any of the other Sweet Solutions people you have been in contact with, and they'll forward it to me. But my address is Adena, A-D-E-N-A-F, like Frank, at sweet-style.com. So feel free to email me directly as well. Okay, so that concludes our discussion of the overview of XSL. We talked about the fact that XSL includes three main technologies, which is Xpath, XSL FO, and XSLT. Very briefly, Xpath is the language that asks our questions for us. It lets us say, get me all the webinars whose level is all. Get me all the webinars whose date proceeded today or followed today. Get me the nodes that are whatever, that are inside of tasks and I don't know, that are inside of a task. You know, check, find out if I'm in a topic, find out if I'm the last item on a list. All those questions are executed through the use of Xpath. We talked about XSL FO, which is formatting objects, which basically is used primarily in our context for PDF as the stage prior to PDF processing. And that's already encompasses both the content that came from the DITA file and the formatting from the style sheets or what have you. And we talked about XSLT, which is the transformation languages, which utilizes Xpath and again allows us to manipulate data and format data. And we showed a real-life example from the plugin, which basically took content from a DITA file, stuck it into an XSL FO tag, in our case it was inline, pulled in attributes from an attribute set, and gave us output that would have been used in the FO file. And lastly, we finished up with resources from the last two slides. I see another chat here. For the XSL versions reference, which version is more relevant? 1 or 1.1? Should we worry about the differences in version? Also a good question. Let me go back to that slide. Okay, so I believe that you want to go with 1.1. I think 1.1 is an updated version of 1. I don't think it matters that much. And I don't think you should worry about it, certainly. But what you should worry about, and I'm glad you brought this up, is we mentioned yesterday there's also a new version of XSL, which is XSL2. And that is not currently used by the toolkit. That is different than version 1. So I would look at XSL version 1 and not XSL version 2. Good question. No problem. Anything else before we wrap up here? I have an outstanding question about entities being referenced by Xpath that I will look up. Good, otherwise I'll take the silence to mean that hopefully everybody's has followed. And if you think of a question after we end again, you can always send it in. Adena, F-A-D-E-N-A-F @sweetstyle.com. Wait, let me just blink. Oh, great. Okay, thank you guys. You were good. Thank you very much for participating. I know it's really hard on the internet when we can't see each other in person, but I appreciate the feedback. Have a wonderful day or afternoon, evening as it may be, and hopefully we'll see you next time. I'm going to end now.